everyone, and welcome to the Afghanistan Project Podcast. I'm your host, Beth Bailey, and today I'm here with stories or cases that broke my heart. And I have two of the most rambunctious and fantastic individuals that I could gather and who I just had to have on at the same time. I don't think I've had you guys on together for an episode, but you are
That's
a dynamic duo. And I think that it'll be really special to have you both share your 5 minutes together. So for those of you who don't know, these lovely faces who've been on the podcast so many times, I've got Kate Kovarovic, the former director of resilience programming for Afghan evac, and John Moses, the co-founder of Massachusetts Afghan Alliance. And I'm going to let you guys duke it out over who gets to go first. I feel like, John, you've got more preparation, but then Kate, you can go off the cuff and just smash it out of the park. So
I'm not getting
I can't decide. I'm not
getting in the middle of this bear fight. This is your show.
I'm gonna let John go first because he's ready.
Yep. All right, John Moses, you're on.
Yeah, and so I first of all, thanks for the opportunity. I first wanted to say, when I put a lot of thought into kind of what the hardest case I could talk about, or the hardest thing that happened, and first thing that came to mind was how many there were, right? So I looked through photos and how many thousands of photos of passports of people that didn't even get out through the airport, right? And these heartbreaking different stories. And I have trouble feeling sad about it. And so I thought it was good to talk about, a case that's been current. We've talked about reunification cases, and a lot of people get caught up in the language. It's 21 million illegals, or it's 10,000 this many. And in all those stories is one person. And even in a family, there's individuals throughout it. And so my story of Masih, who just graduated high school, actually recently in my community.
Yay.
So yeah, which is great, but he's a reunification kid. So I think back to people like Masih, and I wasn't part of his journey until he got to the United States. But what I saw was a young man that saw an opportunity to get his family out of Afghanistan and took it. And his father, happened to do the same thing. And they ended up in the United States. And now 4 years later, they've lived through some pretty awful things. The girls can't go to school. Fortunately, they have financial support. But I think the heartbreak there is these families have lost tens of thousands of human hours with their moms and their brothers. The girls are losing education, and there's still not enough attention. And I think the thing that always broke my heart at the beginning of evac and working with the orgs and doing all of this was there was no special classification, and there was a way to identify them, but it was never really executed on. And at the end of all that inaction remains a family separated by thousands of miles in the United States. And so while he's a real springboard for hope because he's doing so well, I do like to put it on that he's suffered greatly. I've seen this kid cry so many times, and he's really carrying his dad. But reunification families are tough, and I hope whoever sees this pays the attention to it. That's my 5 minutes, and I will say that Kate's done a lot of work, and she knows a lot of these families too. So I think any of our stories could be our stories. I think, but for me, I always want to highlight these reunification families. I think they're really important to talk about.
Yeah. You've got another minute and a half. You can tell us why. Yeah. Tell us more.
If you want to ask questions, I feel like there's three of us. So
I have so many.
Yeah. So he was 14 when he left. So he found his way into the airport. He said he had a friend network there or something, and he got snuck in. And his father got in through the bus. He was driving a bus or something, and that's how he ended up in. He's 14, and there's these pictures. I have these photos of him. He's like a child, and now he's like a state wrestling guy. He does private wrestling. He did wrestling in high school. He's done really amazing stuff. His father's younger than me, which I found astonishing and made me feel incredibly old. He's 45, and I'm like, oh. But they're wearing their age, right? This poor kid is wearing, he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders. And now, with reunification, essentially just stops. The EO's the web, and the spider is the State Department at this point, just knocking cases down and sticking them in that web. So, with not a lot of hope on the horizon, I feel for this family a lot.
Yeah. Can I ask you to Sorry.
No, you
I'm
go ahead.
hoping that JM can like use this to explain to people because I think they don't understand what reunification really means. Like, what
Mm.
does it look like when a 14-year-old kid
Mm-hmm.
arrives here by
Mm-hmm.
themselves, and like what have the last 4 years of working with him like really looked like? Because I think people really don't expect that there are minors who are unaccompanied who are here.
So the unaccompanied have been reunited. It's the so, but some people came with just part of their family. So that
Okay.
young man actually came. He was unaccompanied for a few months, and he said it was probably this is a young kid. He just went on a flight. He got on a military plane, and he lived in like a village of just children until they found his dad. He said it was one of the best parts of his life because there was no adults. They couldn't come in. But then when he gets to the right, so there was a big adventure at the beginning for him, right? We're
Yeah.
going to get our families. They meet people like me that are really interested in helping him and getting him through. And what it looks like for him is the law. I've been deployed. I know what it's like to spend a year away from your family. And now he's worried about his sisters. They're turning 17. It's the low, not the low, the slow, long, um, grading survival, right? This kid's still working full time while doing wrestling and all these other things, sending all that money to home. So he takes care of all of his home finances. But I mean, imagine a 14-year-old kid. All you want to do is grow up. And he did. He's grown up. He's an immense child. And now he's an immense man. So he's done a great job and he makes me super proud.
Yeah, and I can totally understand why reunification is the hardest story just because other groups had hope. They had somebody
Yeah.
saying, "Oh yeah, P1 just started. Oh yeah, SIV, we just got 12K more SIV." Like there have
Yeah.
been moments of hope in that journey. And reunification, it's just like nothing,
No.
nothing, nothing. People don't know about it. I didn't know about it until you told me about it, John. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And one other thing too, just real quick. I mean, that's not the only type of story. The other story, the family in my town, they were blown up at Abbey Gate. Their families were separated, no fault. I mean, they were at the gate trying to get out too, like everybody else. But when Abbey blew, it takes two people in, the rest of the family goes another way. One of their family members is disabled, severely disabled. So we've worked on them with medical care, all kinds of stuff. But I just think, to answer your question, Kate, reunification, it comes in a lot of flavors, and a lot of people, it wasn't their fault. But I will say that reunification families work their tail off, and they do everything we ask them to do, and they are absolutely great neighbors.
Yeah. Kate, I would love to hear from you. Because you've seen for you, not just the Afghan stories, but you've dealt with a lot of the heartache from the US side. So I would love to know of all of those things that you have had to have on your shoulders, what the hardest moments and cases were for you.
Um, I have not talked about this really with very many people. John knows a little bit, which is why I'm very grateful that he's here today. Um, One of my hardest stories involves a group of at-risk women. So a couple of winters ago, I had a friend of mine come to me and essentially say, there's a group of very high profile women, and I've gotten this very like high level request to try and bring them over to the United States. And at the time, I didn't ask very many questions. I had known this person for a very long time. And I felt like when you hear things like, oh, it's a high level request, you're not going to get a lot of details. Later, the information that I was given was that the vice president was trying to evacuate a group of the female protesters, right? So there were 18 women, and they were really struggling to find a group of people who were willing to try to move them because it was so dangerous. And at that point, I was already working with a lot of Afghan females. So whether it was the protesters or the lawyers and judges, that was a group that I was very familiar with. And so I said yes. And, we crafted a plan that sort of followed the footsteps of everything else that I had done in the past. We figured out what the safe house was going to be, how we were going to, transport all of these women to one location. I think what was challenging was that because I wasn't the primary person on the case, some of the security measures that normally I would have undertaken were sort of surpassed because, again, this was such a specific group of people and it was intended to be a high profile case. Like they really wanted it to be a win. They really wanted this to be a success story. But unfortunately, that led to some very real consequences because instead of moving all of these women into different safe houses, they put everybody in one house, which is incredibly dangerous because it's impossible not to notice when you have that many people living in one space. In addition to the fact that a lot of them were allowed to bring family members. So there were actually upwards of 30 people in one space. And because they were so protected by the people who were trying to move them, we were also told that we couldn't search them the way that we normally would. And I just didn't have the practical experience to stand up for myself in that situation and say that doesn't make me comfortable. I assumed that because I trusted the person who had asked me for help, who had done this work before, that it was going to be okay. And it was about 18 hours after we had moved the women into the safe house before they were taken into custody by the Taliban. And I mean, it happened so quickly, right? Like we got confirmation that they had been moved, that they were in the safe house. I had pictures of the safe house, so I knew that it was, they had running water and everything. And I went to bed and I woke up, a couple of hours later, and I was hearing that, we couldn't get in touch with these women. And then there were reports in the neighborhood that the Taliban had shut down either sides of the street. People weren't allowed in or out. And at that point, my heart kind of, cracked because I knew that something was going to happen. And ultimately, what had happened was one of the women had called her husband and disclosed the location of the safe house, and he sold it to the Taliban for drug money. What followed from that point fundamentally changed who I am as a person, because there was at that point about 40 people in Taliban custody that I felt responsible for. And it wasn't just the high profile women who are at extreme risk when they're in Taliban custody. Some of them had their children with them because they didn't want to leave Afghanistan without their kids. And suddenly the kids are in Taliban custody. And for about 6 weeks, I think I was one of the primary supports for the negotiation team. And it just, like, looking back on that time, it was really chaotic and it didn't really make a lot of sense because I was not the person on the team who had the most experience. I didn't have the contacts that I needed in a situation like that. And I admit that I was really surprised at how quickly people stepped away from the situation because in their eyes it had failed. And that was it. So what ended up happening for about 6 weeks was I would go to my full-time job, and then at about 7 p.m. I would go to bed. I would wake up at 10, and then I would stay up through the night because, Afghanistan is so many hours ahead, and I would support the negotiation team as they attempted to negotiate the release of these people. And there is something so lonely about those hours, right? Because even the people who loved me and who I was so close with, there was nothing really that they could do. So at 10 p.m., they were seeing me come back and log on to do this work, and there was nothing that they could say. And so I just have this image of being awake in my bedroom at 4 a.m. and staring at my phone and feeling so lonely and so desperate. Because no matter what else happens in my life, I think that you tend to look at, some of these really formative stories when you're taking stock of what your life has meant. And I am very aware that even though I never even met these women, our stories are inextricably linked at this point. There is a thread from me to them, and that will never be cut. And because of that, I am a person in their story who played a small role in their destruction. And it doesn't matter how well-intentioned I was. It doesn't matter the effort that I put in afterwards. Those 6 weeks, the only thing I was aware of, whether I was on the phone supporting hostage negotiators or buying groceries, was that I had played a role in 40 people being taken into custody by the Taliban. So I think that part really altered my DNA in terms of it doesn't really matter what I do after that point. It doesn't matter how good of a person I try to be. I failed in an excruciating way. And because of my failure, people were hurt. I think it also changed how I view the world around me. I think, and John can really attest to like what this looked like. I started this process thinking, look at all these good people doing good things, right? Like I just assumed that because they were doing good work, that they were good people. And I think what that situation taught me is that bad people can still do good things. And I say that because this person who brought me into the work cared more about their reputation than protecting me and these women. You know, like they were very aware that this had gone south. They were very aware that this was not the win that the vice president or whoever had wanted it to be. There was no assistance. There was no support. There was a lot of critique of an untrained civilian and what I was trying to do. And I think it just changed my heart. And I no longer get to move through the world assuming that people are good. I have to wait for them to show me. And that is so different from who I was before we started this work. So you're right in that, like, I have had a lot of really hard moments, especially doing the mental health work. Like I've sat with people in their darkest moments. But for me, like those 6 weeks were my darkest moments.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
I would love to ask a question. So I think now you've been in the situation a lot of us have been in where you have an obligation, is the word I use, right? Like you have an obligation to these people to do everything you can. What was it like for you when people started saying you have to let it go, like you have to move on? What was your feeling? Like, yeah, just tell us about that experience of people saying, "Hey, just move the F on." Like they're not. Yes.
It's so insensitive.
Mm.
And I recognize that for a lot of like my loved ones, that advice came from a place of like they were very concerned and they wanted me to feel steady. But there is nothing steadying about reaching your hand halfway across the world and just not being able to reach the people that you're trying to, right? So like every night, the people I loved the most, the volunteers who had been with me through this whole thing, were saying like, you just have to like put yourself first. And I remember thinking like, that just tells me that we're different, you know, and that's okay. Like there are some people who can prioritize differently. I'm just not one of them. And I don't want to associate with them in a moment of that type of like internal crisis. It doesn't help to hear that. And I understand where it's coming from, but all it says to me is that like you're not even trying to understand what the situation feels like, because I can't breathe. And that's not the thing that's going to give me air.
Yeah, that's I've heard that at so many levels from volunteers who were told, you need to step down now because you're not functioning properly. And it's like, how? People are being killed on the streets. People
Yeah.
that I care about are in a safe house and they don't know if the Taliban's going to come because it's, they're doing the door-to-door searches. And like what you're describing, Kate, is especially right now, and this is not the purpose. I want, for anybody who's listening to this, I want you to be aware we're not going to dissect all of these stories, but I think this is just right now the time with all of the US rap cases in Pakistan and all of these people who've been following these cases for 4 years and trying to help these Afghans for 4 years. And now they can't do anything as those Afghans are being rounded up by Pakistani police and deported back to Afghanistan, except for watch it and then try to catch them on the other side and restart from zero in a country where the Taliban have like surveillance software. Not only do they, it's just, anyway, I'm so saddened by all of it because when you're told by somebody do this, and it's, all these people told by the US State Department in many cases, this is a case we want you to work. This is a case we're prioritizing. and then they drop it. Anyway, I'm
You know,
so sorry.
prioritization, no prioritization is a prioritization, right? So if you like, I prioritize something at zero, still prioritized, right? And I think, Kate brought up one other point, like it's really important who you work with, right? One of the things I've learned that really broke my heart was there were people that I also thought really cared. And as soon as the camera disappears, you no longer see them, right? The credit's what matters. And so there's a lot of people in this work that have really slogged it out and cleaned up other people's messes, and they're not showing up on TV, getting put in for like congressional awards for like, all the things. And so it's really hard and very lonely to sit alone in the dark at 4 a.m. and be like, holy shit, I don't have a team. I don't know what I'm doing. And then just dialing the phone. And it's a lot of credit to you, Kate, honestly. A lot of people just gave up.
Yeah,
I don't mean
I've
to
never
laugh. I'm
worked a
sorry.
case like that.
No,
Like,
It's a stress laugh.
No,
I
yeah.
had to stop myself from doing it. The only casework I did was with Operation 620, and it was at such a minimal level. I never, got someone a safe house or dealt with a landlord or anything. Well, I had one bad interaction regarding a landlord, and it was enough for me. I knew I cannot balance all of those things. It is an intense, intense thing to be responsible for someone's existence, to that's especially when you can't do anything. How are you going to help if things go south? Like you're it's a lot, Kate, and I'm so sorry that happened. I don't think I knew about that at all. So
Yeah, it one of the things that I would say to help people sort of understand, we see a lot of videos going around right now on social media of families who are watching their loved ones get detained by ICE. And when you watch those videos, I think it really invokes a sense of empathy because it's utter panic and chaos, and it's so dehumanizing. And after that initial moment where someone is taken, then you don't know if they're okay, but you know that the conditions they're being held in aren't. It's very similar to that. And I think for me, there was an added level of as an assault survivor, knowing that at any moment while I was trying to do my best, that one of those women might be going through something that I already had encountered, and it rips your soul in two. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that I had played a role in that possibly being something that happened to someone else. And it didn't matter what my intentions were, and it didn't matter that I got up every night and I wasn't sleeping and I was calling people to come in and help. What mattered to me was that every second of every day I had to wonder if that's what was happening. And I think that people, it's impossible to capture what that feels like for people if you haven't felt it. It is absolute torture in a very different way than what those people went through, but it just felt like it changed my DNA.
Makes you tougher, that's for sure. If anything, I don't know if tough's the right
nobody
word.
wants
It's
that.
but here's the thing. I think when you stick it out, whatever the outcome, I think those people are always grateful, right? Even Masi's really grateful for all the work I do, and even though it's hard, for on the opposite end of that is like I have a grown adult man crying about his daughters, his son, and like what am I gonna do? And I can, the word for crazy in Dari is Dawana. And like I know that word because they use it all the time. I'm Dawana. And I'm like, I get it, man. And I think recently what we've seen, the real heartbreak has been about the slamming of the doors, right? We every time they find, with an EO or a rule, it just squeezes the channel so small. And just one thing, one other quick case that, I think I should address is I have an American citizen in California whose husband is going through IV, right? So a traditional immigration case. totally ready to go, da 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 da, and it keeps getting tagged with administrative refusals, right? So he can't go back to. He's in Pakistan on a bad visa now, waiting for a visa, waiting for medical appointments. But it's the husband of an American, and it doesn't feel like they're slowing it down for, I feel like these are going to continue. It's going to get harder, and it feels very targeted to people that veterans care about. And it makes me, that's why I don't get sad. At this point, I'm just kind of angry. And I'm angry for people like Kate and for you that have to all deal with this bullshit. So at least we have a better team now.
That's what I keep saying, is that it's the people who are all doing the same fight right now
Yeah.
in different ways. All of us do it in a different way. And I think that this endeavor to capture all these stories really shows how we're all uniquely affected. We all have a reason, a different reason that we're doing it, and a different thing that broke us down. For me, I filmed my episode a few days ago, and it's always been the cases of parents with their kids because of my kids. And that motivates me. I was a stay-at-home mom when I started this. I am a single mom now, and my kids are my everything. This People will not believe that, given how much effort they know that I funnel into this podcast and helping Afghans, but I funnel even more energy into my kids. And so
Uh,
watching
Kate and I have
parents,
met your kids. They are top notch. Top notch.
and they know what Afghanistan is. They say Afghan. They're like, oh, is this about Afghanistan? Are you doing something with Afghanistan right now? But I don't want them to ever understand it at the level that we're talking about it right now. That's the whole goal here, is to make sure that they never have to understand it at this level, that they don't experience what we experienced and continue to experience. So
And
all
improving.
of us comes at it from a different, everybody has a different angle, but it has hit us all hard. And so that's the whole reason I'm doing this. And I really appreciate you guys for sharing those stories, which are so different, and yet it just shows the diversity of the human experience of these last 4 years. So thank you both. And we've gone way over 10 minutes. So we're going to
Oops.
close this one out. And Tasha Kaur, and hope to see you all again soon.